Just before dawn at Mont Saint-Michel, the tide pulls back like a curtain, revealing a mile-long causeway to the abbey. In that quiet hour, locals say they've seen them, 81 dark shapes in hooded cloaks, stepping slowly across the wet sand. They move without a sound, drifting toward the ancient stone walls, then vanish when the tide returns. No footprints, no ripple of water, only empty sand and rising mist. Tonight, we stand at the edge of that strange tide and ask, who are these silent figures? Why do they return only under the full moon? Some call it legend, others whisper of an old curse, bound to the rhythm of the sea. Over the next hour, we'll follow every clue, from lost records to ghostly witness accounts, to discover whether Mont Saint-Michel really hides a haunting secret, or if these cloak and shadow visions are just tricks of moonlight and memory. In the year 1421, a group of 40 devout pilgrims gathered at dawn on the muddy sands before Mont Saint-Michel. They carried simple pack-sacks, rosaries, and hope in their hearts as they followed the narrow causeway that would lead them to the great abbey's doors. The tide was low, and the wet sand glistened under a pale morning sun. Fishing boats bobbed in the distance, and gulls wheeled overhead, waiting for the fishermen to return. But by nightfall, only one pilgrim made it back to the mainland alive. His clothes were torn, and his face was ashen. He walked straight to the chapel door, trembling so badly he could barely stand. Priests and monks rushed to his side, but he uttered no prayers, no names. His eyes were wide with a terror they could not place. He sank to his knees and pointed mutely at the path disappearing beneath the returning tide. Then he fell silent. No one could get a word from him. He carried no written message, only a single carved symbol on the wooden crucifix he clutched so tightly that his fingers bled. The abbey records for that year were abruptly sealed. Monks locked away the pilgrim's pack, his sandals, even his rosary beads, as if hiding a shameful secret. They wrote only one line in the official log: "Pilgrims lost, witness returned broken," and they buried the rest of the story in stone vaults beneath the abbey floor. For centuries, the monks guarded that secret. Yet rumors spread among coastal villagers. Every so often, on nights when the moon was full and the tide lay low, someone would vanish on the sands. A local fisherman might tiptoe across the flat, half-submerged causeway to check his nets and never return. A merchant's daughter, curious about the old stories, would slip out to test her courage and be swallowed by the mist before reaching the abbey gates. Dozens of these vanishings were whispered about, but never officially recorded. The abbey ledger remained stubbornly blank. Today we will retrace the steps of those lost pilgrims. We begin with the one soul who survived that first tragedy in 1421. His silent presence in the chapel that evening left an echo that still haunts Mont Saint-Michel. He never spoke of what he saw, but centuries later, historians discovered a half-forgotten parchment scrawled in shaky ink, hidden behind a loose brick. The parchment bears only a few hurried lines. We heard the chanting before we saw them, figures in black, moving without feet. They rose from the tide and beckoned us away from the path. One by one, my friends followed. Their souls are gone. Those last words trail off into smudged ink. We'll examine the path those pilgrims walked and follow the clues they left behind. The medieval map in the abbey archives shows a shortcut across a tidal pool marked Les Promeneurs Perdus, the Lost Walkers. It lies far from the main road, but it was well known to the monks as a shortcut when the tide was low. The monks forbade its use, but word of a secret path always gets around. We found a second reference in a faded diary, written more than 200 years later by an abbess named Sister Heloise. She describes a night in 1623 when she heard chanting echo across the bay. From her window high in the bell tower, she saw cloaked figures stepping onto the sand. They moved in pairs, in silence, toward the abbey doors. She wrote that the servants and guards followed at a distance and never reported back. She burned the diary after just 2 pages, but the memory of those cloaked shapes drove her to write a desperate prayer in the margin. May God shield us from the watchers of the tide, for their hunger is not of this world. This warning is the only one that survived. We'll revisit the abbey's stone corridors and the lonely sands at dawn, where the tide exposes more than just the path. It reveals what lies hidden beneath the waves. Finally, we discovered the pilgrim's own crucifix in a locked wooden chest in the crypt. The small carving on the back is a twisted circle surrounded by 8 pointed rays. No monk could explain its meaning. We consulted experts in medieval symbols who told us it resembles a nautical compass, yet the rays point not to the 4 cardinal directions, but to the gaps in the tide's ebb and flow. What were those cloaked watchers guiding the pilgrims toward, and why did only one man escape to tell the tale? In the chapters that follow, we will breathe new life into those dusty logs, interview the descendants of the fishermen who once patrolled the sands, and test the rhythm of the tide against the rhythm of our pulses. By the end of this hour, we'll uncover the half-told story that the monks tried to bury, and finally hear the warning that Pilgrim carried in his silent, haunted gaze. They say the walls of Mont Saint-Michel hold their own secret voices. Deep in the abbey's crypt, long after the candles gutter out, a few brave monks recorded eerie sounds. Their scribbled notes speak of chanting drifting through empty arches and hollow stone corridors. They heard voices older than the stones themselves, soft, urgent calls that seemed to name each pilgrim who slept beneath the vaulted ceiling. Imagine lying on a thin straw mattress in a chilly cell, wrapped in a coarse wool cloak. The lamps are low. You drift toward sleep, thinking only of tomorrow's prayer. Then you hear it, a distant murmur, like wind rushing through a narrow canyon. It grows clearer. Someone softly calls your name. At first you think it's a monk rousing you for midnight office, but when you climb out of your bed and follow the sound, you find only empty hallways and dusty tombs. One monk, Brother Etienne, wrote in 1627, "I awoke to strange chanting. I counted 7 voices, though I saw no bodies. Their song was neither Latin nor French. It carried no words I could repeat, only the sound of longing." He tried to follow the echoes, but as he turned each corner, the chanting moved further away. By the time he reached the crypt entrance, the voices vanished, leaving only the soft drip of water from the stone walls. Centuries later, modern researchers set out to capture these whispers. In 2015, an audio team placed sensitive microphones in the crypt and the nave above. They recorded 7 nights of sound. When they played back the tapes, they heard faint chanting around 2 hours before dawn. The pitch rose and fell like a single voice speaking an unknown prayer. Then it faded into silence. Audio engineers ran the recordings through special filters. They removed background noise, wind, dripping water, distant traffic. What remained was chilling, a low chorus of soft vowels rising in harmony, then dropping away. Dr. Marie Dubois, an acoustic archaeologist, examined the recordings. She told us, "These are not echoes of modern voices. The pattern and resonance suggest deep resonance within the stone itself. It's as if the abbey sings back the memory of every voice that ever called out here." Visitors who sleep under those arches tell similar stories. One student lodger, Henri, kept a journal. "I dreamed I walked across the mirror-flat sand toward the abbey at midnight. As I entered the door, I heard 7 voices chanting my name. They spoke with a sense of urgency, as if pleading for help. I woke in a sweat, my heart pounding. I will not sleep in that cell again." Another guest, Claire, was an audio hobbyist. She secretly recorded her stay in the monk's guest room. Her tape captured a faint but clear whisper in the dead of night. "Nicholas, Nicholas." She played back the sound at half speed and confirmed it was her friend's name, Nicholas, the student with her on the trip. Both of them checked every corner of the room. No speaker wires, nothing that could explain the voice. The question is, are these just tricks of the mind or something else? To test that, experts set up playback experiments. They played the filtered chants in an anechoic chamber, a room designed to cancel echoes. Even in total silence, listeners reported chills, goosebumps, and feelings of being watched. Some said they heard faint footsteps circling the chamber, though no one moved. Professor Daniel Russo, a psychologist, studied the effect. He says our brains are wired to detect whispers in the dark. In unfamiliar spaces, we fill gaps in sound with meaning. But he adds, the recordings from Mont Saint-Michel have frequency patterns not found in everyday speech. They suggest resonance in low-frequency bands that can stimulate the limbic system, our primal center for emotion. In plain language, your body may feel haunted before your mind even realizes why. Legends from local villagers go even further. They tell of masked figures gliding through the abbey at night. Shadows gather beneath the arches and sing together. When the tide creeps back in, the singing stops and the shadows slip away into the water. Some say the voices belong to pilgrims lost on the sands, dragged under by hidden currents. They came seeking mercy and now call out for someone to guide them home. In 1702, an abbess named Sister Marguerite wrote a warning in a diary hidden in the chapel walls. These stones remember, they chant their sorrow to those who will hear. Her diary page is faded and water-stained, but her final line remains legible. Heed not the voices unless you are willing to follow them into the dark. Tonight we play you short excerpts of the modern recordings. Close your eyes and listen. You'll hear the low hum of stone singing, a chorus of breaths that sound almost human. Then a single syllable emerges, like a name barely spoken. You might feel the hairs on your neck prickle or the air grow suddenly cold. If so, you're experiencing what the monks heard centuries ago. Now imagine a lone pilgrim returning across the mudflats before dawn. The wind whips against his cloak. He hears the chanting rise behind him. He dares not look back, but he feels 7 unseen watchers guiding him, urging him forward. He runs, heart pounding, until he reaches safety. He carries that sound in his memory forever. We cannot prove these whispers are ghosts or echoes of past lives, but we know the abbey's stones hold a record of every voice ever raised within them. When the tide is low and the moon is high, those stones sing once more. The question is, will you listen? And if you do, will you be brave enough to follow the whispers into the heart of Mont Saint-Michel? Hidden behind a moss-covered wall in the abbey's undercroft, workers found something no one expected. An ancient ledger. It was bound in heavy iron plates, each edge riveted like a tiny fortress. The front cover read simply, Anno Domini 1567. Inside, on yellowed parchment pages, were 81 names written in neat looping script. Each name listed the day and month, but never the year. No cause of death, no burial place, just names. And beside every single one, a straight line cut through the ink, as if a razor had struck with perfect force. Who wrote this book, and why? Experts believe the ledger was created by a secret brotherhood of monks who worshipped in this hidden chapel. Their order valued silence, devotion, and absolute secrecy. The iron binding suggests they intended the book to last far longer than any normal record. They needed it to survive fire, water, and time. We sent pages for carbon dating. The parchment gave a date close to 1570, and the iron binding matched 16th century metalwork. No doubt, this was an authentic relic from the Reformation era, when suspicion and fear ran deep in every abbey and church across France. But why cross out every name? Some historians think each strike means the person passed on to a new spiritual realm. Others argue it marks a death, yet there are no deaths recorded. That twist points to something stranger. Perhaps these 81 people vanished rather than died. Their bodies never returned, just like today's cloaked figures leave no footprints. On closer inspection, we found odd symbols in the ledger's margins. Small clusters of 3 dots, a circle with a tiny cross inside, a series of wavy lines. They look like secret codes, not Latin abbreviations. We asked a medieval cryptologist, Dr. Laurent Petit, to analyze them. He said the symbols match patterns used by clandestine religious groups in Brittany. They believed water and stone could trap souls. They made pacts to guide the lost across water into hidden sanctuaries. One of the most disturbing entries is August 12th. Next to the name Jehan Leclerc, there is an extra mark, a small triangle drawn in fresh ink, as if added years later. Nearby, someone scrawled the word redevance, meaning tribute. Could it be that each person paid a price, then was crossed out when their debt was due, and who added that triangle centuries after the ledger was first closed? We also found faint fingerprints in the rust between the iron plates. Chemical analysis suggests the prints belong to a man who handled the book often. His oils have partially preserved the rust pattern. Could he have been the last surviving monk of that secret order, still tending to the ledger in hiding? If so, his identity is lost to history, and perhaps he became one of the cloaked figures seen at low tide. To learn more, our team shone ultraviolet light over the pages. Hidden words glowed, Latin phrases like lux et umbra, light and shadow, and custos viae, guardian of the way. They hint at a ritual oath to guard a path that leads souls across shifting sands. The monks believed that every full moon, the boundary between land and sea weakened. Then, the guardians must guide those marked in the ledger toward safety, whatever that safety might be. We also discovered a torn scrap of vellum tucked between pages 20 and 21. It reads, "Once 81 have crossed, the path is closed until the next spring flood." That note suggests the order expected exactly 81 to pass through. Then they paused and waited for the tides to renew the causeway. But what happens when another 81 appear? That may explain the 81 cloaked figures locals report each month. On our last night in the Undercroft, we brought portable lights and recorded ourselves reading each name aloud. As we spoke, Catherine de Montfort, Pierre le Grand, Isabelle Roux. We heard a faint rustle behind us, not wind, but something like a soft footstep on old stone. We turned and saw only a dark corridor, no figure, no cloak, just the cold gleam of iron rivets in the ledger's binding. Some authors claim the ledger is a contract between the monks and a water spirit they called La Dame des Marais. They say the spirit demanded human guides to cross the sands safely. Those who served were struck from the book, freed from mortal life. In return, the spirit spared the abbey from shipwrecks and famine. This legend fits with old Breton folk tales about sea maids who led lost sailors to shore or dragged them to watery graves. Could the ledger be proof that this covenant was real? Every name crossed out might be someone who took up the role of guide. After serving, they vanished, but returned each month as cloaked figures to lead the next group. Their steel-shod ledger bound their promise for eternity. But here's the final question. If those 81 guides have finished their duty, why is the ledger still used? The book shows no new names after 1567, but sightings of cloaked shapes continue today. Perhaps new names go unrecorded, lost to time, or maybe the covenant demands a fresh list, one hidden from modern eyes. As you reflect on this iron-bound book, think of the sandbar stretching toward the abbey. It looks safe at low tide, but shifting channels and hidden quicksand can trap the unwary. The ledger may mark safe passage for the chosen few, but only for those who know the secret ritual. Everyone else is left to sink into the mud. So remember, the next time you cross the causeway after dark, look for the iron plate peeking from the old wall. You might glimpse the ledger's cover or feel the brush of a silent cloak guiding you. But beware, if you aren't one of the marked 81, you could become the next name struck from the page. Tonight, as the moon rises over Mont Saint-Michel, ask yourself, who holds the keys to this hidden book, and who will be the next to cross its pages into the realm of shadows and tides? The iron-shod ledger may be the autumn, the secret of the abbey, and the oldest promise that no mortal life can break. Have you ever walked along a beach at low tide and wondered what secrets the sand might keep? At Mont Saint-Michel, something strange happens when the waters pull back under the full moon. Tiny footprints appear, leading from the exposed sand right up to the abbey's massive doors, and then they vanish as if the earth itself swallowed them. Local residents first noticed these footprints decades ago. They are not human size. Each print measures only about 2 inches long and 1 inch wide. They form a single line, almost like someone tiptoed across the wet sand, one print after another, always toward the abbey, always ending at the threshold. No footprints return the same way. No one ever finds prints leading back to the water. Scientists tell us that sand can't hold fine detail when water drains quickly. The tide at Mont Saint-Michel recedes at more than 10 feet per hour. In theory, footprints should collapse, and be gone in minutes. Yet these tiny impressions last for hours. Some have stayed visible until the tide rose fully again. We found the earliest photograph of a footprint in a 1952 local newspaper. It shows a clear, deep impression in the sand, perfectly preserved. A woman named Madame Legal knelt beside it and pointed at the top of the abbey in the distance. The caption read, "The Path of the Unknown Pilgrim." To learn more, our team asked geologist Dr. Anne-Marie Durand to examine the sand. She collected samples at the footprint sites and ran lab tests on grain size, moisture content, and compaction. Here's what she discovered. Unusual grain alignment. In most beaches, sand grains lie in random order. Under pressure, like a footprint, they shift and leave a loose impression. But at Mont Saint-Michel, many grains are flat and plate-like. They lock together and damp, forming a thin, stable crust. Dr. Durand calls this tidal cement. It can hold shallow shapes surprisingly well, but only for a few minutes, never hours. High clay content. The sand here contains more clay than most ocean shores. Clay bonds with water to form a slippery, sticky layer that dries slowly. That sticky layer can hold prints longer than ordinary sand. Still, even clay prints fade in a few hours, not half a tide cycle. Salt crystals. Every time the tide retreats, salt water seeps into the sand. Salt crystals form as the water evaporates in sunlight. Those crystals act like natural glue between grains. Over a low tide period, the top millimeter of sand hardens into a fine crust. That crust can keep footprints from washing away until the next high tide. Dr. Durand's tests explain why prints last longer here than on other beaches, but they do not explain how physical feet, so small and precise, appear only once, then disappear. What makes those fresh, tiny footprints? To test the mystery, our team conducted an experiment. At dawn, we went down to the sand, just after the moon hit its peak. We followed the tidal schedule, mapping the edge of the water every 15 minutes. When the tide was at its lowest, we laid a strip of fabric on the sand and used a child-size wooden foot stamp to make a line of prints leading to a mock doorway cut into a portable wooden wall set on the beach. We watched closely. The sticky clay crust and salt crystals held our prints for about 30 minutes. After that, edges began to blur. By 50 minutes, our footprints were all but gone, lost in small collapses and wind. Yet real sightings say these tiny footprints remain for hours, some even 8 hours until the next tide. Next, we tried fresh, real footprints. An assistant in soft-soled shoes stepped carefully along the same path we stamped. The assistant's prints sank deeper and were less clear than the small wooden stamp. They started to fade within 20 minutes. That made sense. Heavier pressure cracks the crust and collapses the clay. So real human feet can't make those tiny, shallow, uniform prints. And wind, sun, and time should erase them long before the tide returns. Yet eyewitnesses describe perfect lines of prints, spaced evenly at about 6 inches apart, always leading to the abbey's threshold. Could an animal be making them? We considered shorebirds, crabs, even mice, but none leave prints that match the shape, size, or spacing reported by witnesses. Crabs scuttle sideways, birds leave 3-toed marks. Mice have longer hind prints mixed with shorter front prints. These mysterious footprints are all the same shape, size, and orientation, and they never lead away from the abbey. To gather more stories, we visited nearby cafes and asked locals about their experiences. A fisherman named Pierre told us he spotted footprints one misty morning in 1978. He said, "I saw them from my boat. They glistened like silver lines on the sand. I tried to follow them on foot, but my boots sank in mud and I felt a pull, like something under the sand dragging me back. I ran away." He refused to go back, saying those prints belonged to spirits, not to people. An elderly guide, Madame Thibault, said she once saw footprints vanish right before her eyes. She knelt by a fresh print, traced the shape with her finger, and watched as the edges curled and dissolved in the wind. "It was like watching a drawing vanish on wet paper," she whispered. "I swear, I saw the print fade." We also interviewed Dr. Stéphane Martin, a tide specialist who monitors the bay's currents. He told us that underwater springs near the abbey sometimes pulse cold water up through the sand. He calls them submarine seep springs. They can lift the crust gently, making the sand slump and collapse. But that happens everywhere around the bay, not just at the doorway. Yet footprints always vanish at the abbey's threshold. The collapsing zones stretch in irregular patterns, never neat, never just inside the doors. Could the abbey itself be connected to the mystery? The doorway threshold is ancient granite, worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims. At the base, a shallow trench collects water when the tide returns. Maybe that trench acts like a gutter, channeling rising water back under the sand and causing prints there to collapse faster. But that only explains why prints inside the doorway fade first. It doesn't explain why prints appear at all. We even tried motion-activated cameras pointed at the sand at night under full moonlight. We recorded hours of darkness with nothing but shifting shadows. No human, no crab, no mouse. The footprints appeared only when we checked by daylight. Our cameras never captured their creation. That leads us to the strangest possibility. The footprints appear after the fact, not in real time. They could be caused by something that moves too fast or too slow for our cameras to catch, or something that walks between the camera's field and the shoreline, just out of view, or something we cannot see. Some legends speak of ghost pilgrims who cross the bay under moonlight. These spirits carry lanterns and walk the sands in silent procession. They are bound to Mont Saint-Michel, returning each month to relive an unfinished quest. Their tiny feet leave prints when they step on the fresh crust. When they pass through the doors, they vanish back into the abbey's hidden chapels. Others claim the footprints belong to children who died in an earlier plague. Their souls were too small to be seen. They wander the sands, still seeking sanctuary, still trying to touch the holy stones. They leave only a trace of their presence, prints too small, too perfect, too brief for mortal eyes to follow. So whether you believe in science or spirits, the footprints at Mont Saint-Michel remain a mystery. Modern geology can explain why the sand holds a print longer than expected. But nothing in physics can explain how those tiny, perfect impressions form in the first place, and why they lead only to the abbey's doors. Tonight, ask yourself, if you saw a line of ghostly footprints on the sand, would you follow them? Would you walk toward the threshold, curious, hopeful, or terrified of what might await inside? The wind is rising. The moon is full. Soon the tide will return, and the sand will hide its secret once more, until the next time the bells of Mont Saint-Michel ring beneath the moonlit sky. They say Mont Saint-Michel's bell tower has no rope. None. Generations ago, the rope was cut and carried away, leaving only the heavy iron bell and its clapper hanging silent in the dark. Yet every full moon, at precisely 3:13 a.m., the bell rings, once every 60 seconds for exactly 5 minutes. No human or animal has ever been spotted climbing the narrow stairs. No wind strong enough to swing the clapper has been recorded, and still the bell tolls. Our investigation began with the tower guards. For centuries, 2 sentries have taken turns watching the abbey at night. We interviewed guard Marcel Leblanc, who stood watch for 20 years. He told us, "I first heard it when I was new. I ran up those stairs with my lantern, but the clapper swung by itself. I saw it strike the bell 5 times. My lantern flickered. I ran back down and found my boots unlatched and my heart pounding." Another guard, Sophie Renaud, described it this way. "The air goes cold, the moonlight through the windows turns silver. Then you hear the slow swing, creak, clang, creak, clang. I covered my ears. I thought it would never stop." We decided to enter the bell room ourselves. It lies at the very top of the tower, a cramped, circular chamber of stone. The bell hangs from an ancient wooden beam. The clapper is a solid iron bar, weighing over 50 pounds. No rope, no messiques, hanism. Nothing but a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Yet on the floor, we found fresh iron dust and deep grooves worn into the stone by the swinging clapper. To gather data, we installed a historic seismometer on the wooden beam. This century-old device can record the smallest vibrations and swings. Then we retreated to our camp below, cameras rolling and sound recorders ready. We set our watches to 3:13 a.m. on a clear night. When the moon reached its peak, the abbey trembled with a low creak. The seismometer's needle jumped. The clapper began to move slowly, pulling itself away from the bell and dropping with a thunderous clang. 1 minute later, it swung again, and again, 5 times. Then it stopped. The seismometer recorded exactly 5 swings, each one identical in force and timing. Our sound recorders captured the ringing, deep, echoing like something alive. We played it back at full volume. You could hear the metal resonating through every stone wall of the abbey. Visitors near the base told us they felt the ground vibrate under their feet. Wind gauges on the ramparts showed calm air. Temperatures stayed steady, no sudden gusts. No animals were seen in the tower. Security cameras at lower levels recorded no one entering or leaving the tower between midnight and dawn. It was as if the bell rang itself. We called in structural engineers to inspect the wooden beam. They found it in excellent condition. It should not move on its own. Beams that old tend to warp or dry rot, but this beam had been treated with fresh tar only months ago. The bolts in the metal yoke were secure. Nothing could loosen or shift the bell naturally. Next, we consulted a clockmaker, Père Lucien Arnaud. He specializes in antique mechanisms. He examined the clapper assembly and said, "There is no hidden mechanism, no hidden spring, no electromagnet. Nothing could make it move except an outside force." He tested every inch of metal, every joint. He even removed the clapper to check for secret wires or pulleys. He found nothing. That left only a possibility. Someone or something unseen climbs the tower and swings the clapper by hand. But how? Staircases are narrow and steep. Guards would have to pass each other in the dark. Footprints in the dust would show a path. Yet no footprints have ever been found on the stairs or floorboards. In centuries of watch logs, not one guard has reported a human intruder. Local legend says the original bell was cast in 1421 by the last abbot before Mont Saint-Michel closed its fortress gates. He commissioned the rope's removal to prevent enemy armies from using the bell to signal an attack. When the abbey fell silent, he cursed the bell to ring on the night of each full moon, so that the souls of past pilgrims might find their way to heaven. Of course, that sounds like a fairy tale, but when the seismometer's readings line up perfectly with guard testimonies, it's hard to dismiss every story as myth. We recorded dozens of nights of data. Each full moon produced the same pattern, a slow creak, followed by 5 unwavering swings at 1-minute intervals, then silence until the next full moon. No variation, no mistakes. It was always perfect. Could moonlight itself be the trigger? Some researchers have proposed that moonlight hitting certain crystals in the stone could generate a tiny electrical charge that, over time, builds up enough force to move metal. We tested samples of the local granite and found trace amounts of quartz and mica. Under high-intensity lamps, we saw slight voltages, barely measurable. Far too small to move 50 pounds of iron. A more daring theory involves wind echoes. At just the right angle, wind passing over the tower's arrow slits could create a standing wave, like blowing across a bottle's mouth. That wave might transfer energy down the walls to the bell chamber, nudging the clapper. We set up wind tunnels and scale models. We could make the model bell ring once or twice, but only at very specific wind speeds and directions, and never 5 perfect timed rings. Real wind is never that consistent at 3:13 a.m. Some nights, sheep herders on the tidal flats reported hearing the bell long before the official 3:13 a.m. ring. They said they would wake, see the abbey's shadow glowing, and feel a pull in the air. But this early ringing never appears on our seismometer. Could it be our equipment that misses the first ring? We double-checked calibration. It was accurate to the millisecond. The official ring always matches the full moon schedule. We also reviewed guard rotations. 2 guards work each night, switching at 2:45 a.m. and 4 o'clock a.m. No guard change happens at 3:13 a.m., yet all guard statements say they heard the bell themselves. 4 different teams swore to us they heard it, felt it, saw the clapper swing on its own. None would agree to a camera in the bell room. They said it would anger whatever spirit moves the clapper. In a final test, we rigged the bell room with infrared lasers across the doorway. If anyone entered, the beams would trip alarms in the guardhouse. No alarms ever sounded. The lasers stayed unbroken, yet the bell rang. Tonight we stand on the ramparts, listening for the bell. The tide is out, and the bay is quiet. The moon is full and bright. The old stones glow silver. We wait for 3:13 a.m. Whatever moves that clapper, it shows no mercy to skeptics. It has kept its secret for centuries. It rings itself perfectly, without rope or human hand. So we ask you, what moves the bell without a rope? Ghostly abbot? Hidden mechanism? Power of the moon? Or something else entirely beyond our understanding? When that bell tolls tonight, know that a mystery older than the stones lives on, and that its voice still echoes across the sands of Mont Saint-Michel. They say it begins just after midnight, when the moon hangs low over the drawbridge. Locals who've stayed late in the tavern swear they've seen them, 12 cloaked figures gliding silently across the wooden plank. There's no sound of footfall, no rustle of fabric. Each carries a long, dark staff that catches the moonlight like a shard of obsidian. Then they vanish at the chapel door, pulling their hoods tighter, slipping inside as if the stones themselves opened to let them in. Tonight, we retrace their steps, step by step, to see if this spectral march can be captured on camera, or if it's all just a trick of fog and imagination. Our first task was to map the exact route across the bridge. We laid out chalk on the weathered boards at 5-foot intervals, marking each footstep we would take. Then we set up 3 infrared cameras, one at the bridge entrance, one halfway across, and one at the chapel doorway. Each camera was angled to catch anything warmer than the night air. We tested them with our own team, walking in front of each to make sure the sensors registered our body heat. The cameras worked perfectly until the procession came. On the night of a full moon, we gathered at 11:30 p.m. The air was still, the tide low, and a thin fog crept around the tower's base. At midnight, our infrared screens flickered to life. A faint glow appeared at the bridge entrance, a cluster of heat signatures moving as one. No separate footprints, just a single, ghostly heat band crossing each chalk mark in perfect time. At the halfway camera, the same band glided by, as if the figures left no trace of cold or warmth behind them. Then, at the chapel door, the glow vanished entirely. The cameras recorded nothing inside. It was as if the sanctuary swallowed them whole. To get a human perspective, we tracked down the only living witness from 50 years ago, old Tom Boudreau, now 82 and nearly blind from cataracts. He still remembers the night he followed the procession. We met him in his creaky farmhouse on the edge of the marsh, where he spends his days whittling bird perches and sipping weak tea. He told us, voice trembling, "I saw them in the moonlight, tall, silent, moving like mist. I grabbed my lantern and legged it after him, heart pounding like a bell, but the fog rolled in, thick as cream. I could hear the scrape of staffs, but I couldn't see a thing. I stumbled into the mud, lost my boots, and by the time I clawed my way back, the chapel was quiet, empty. We pressed him for details, how many steps, how wide the procession, what they looked like up close. He remembered the staffs best, 12 straight poles carved with strange runes. But he never saw faces. They kept their hoods low. Even in the lantern's light, I saw nothing but shadows where their faces should be. He tried to follow for nearly a half-mile, he said, but the fog conspired to erase every path. I felt their eyes on me, he whispered. Not angry at all. Just watching. Back at the chapel, we examined the door where they vanished. The heavy oak bears no scrape marks or fingerprint smudges. The hinges are old but sound. We dusted for prints and found only a single muddy smear, likely from Tom's boots on that long-ago night. Inside, the nave lies silent, its stone floor cold to the touch. We swept the entryway for heat. None remained. It was as if those cloaked figures passed between worlds, their bodies never truly present in ours. Experts who study inexplicable phenomena have suggested several theories. One says the procession is a residual haunting, a loop of energy replaying a tragic ritual from centuries ago. Another theory points to mass psychogenic illness. When enough people expect to see something strange, the brain fills in the blanks. But our infrared data seems to rule out pure imagination. The same heat signatures crossing the bridge on the same dates for decades. This demands another answer. Local folklore hints at a secret pact made with wandering monks in the 1300s. Legend tells of an order that vowed eternal service to the island's dead, swearing never to remove their hoods or rest in consecrated ground. When the abbey gates closed at dusk, they rose each full moon to continue their vigil, carrying staffs carved from sacred yew. Some say they guard hidden relics. Others believe they ferry lost souls across the marsh. Whatever the truth, the procession remains bound to the chapel by a promise older than memory. In our final test, we tried an audio recording, a parabolic mic aimed at the bridge. We hoped to catch the faint scrape of staffs on wood or whispered chants. At 12:02 a.m. we heard nothing, but at 12:17 a.m. a soft, rhythmic tapping began, 12 beats, each echoing like a distant drum. Then a low hum, almost musical, resonating under the bridge. It lasted 30 seconds, then cut off abruptly. The mic recorded silence for the rest of the night. When we played it back, our blood ran cold. Tonight's footage and recordings are being analyzed by acoustics engineers and historians. We'll share their findings in our next chapter. But one thing is clear. The cloaked procession is no simple ghost story. Whether spirit or echo of an ancient vow, those figures still stride across the drawbridge, unseen yet felt, moving as one toward the chapel that refuses to let them go. So ask yourself, would you brave the fog and moonlight to follow those cloaked walkers? Or would you heed old Tom's warning and let the procession pass in silence? The candles in the chapel windows burn each full moon, calling them home. And until someone pries open the chapel doors at midnight, the march will continue. 12 shadows on the sand, bound by a secret that no living soul has yet dared uncover. They say it always starts at the turn of the tide, when the water pulls back just enough to expose the slippery flats around Mont Saint-Michel. Local fishermen who've worked these waters for generations swear they've heard screams on the wind, sailors yanked from their boats by invisible forces before the tide sweeps in again. One captain, old Jean Leblanc, nearly lost his mind after his mate vanished mid-haul. He reappeared 3 days later on a distant sandbank, soaked to the bone and muttering about the Sisters of the Sand, dragging him under. Tonight, we'll let those voices echo again, through the words of their children, the pages of ancient logbooks, and the silent logic of ocean currents. This is Mariner's testimony. Jean's grandson, Philippe, still trembles when he recalls his grandfather's story. We sat with him in his creaky coastal cottage, walls lined with fishing nets and faded photographs of proud seamen. Philippe showed us Jean's original logbook, its pages yellowed and splattered with salt. On the night of June 17th, 1692, Jean wrote, "Mist, heavy as wool, hand grabbed me from below deck, pulled so hard I heard a soft chant in the surf. Then, days of blank space. Finally, I lay on the flats, throat raw, voice gone. They carried me home." Philippe's voice cracked as he read aloud the final entry, "Beware the sisters when the moon is full. He still won't sail after dark." Across the harbour we met Marie Claire, whose great-great-grandfather was a fisherman named Lucien Marot. His descendants passed down a battered brass compass and a scrap of canvas, both stained a dark rust. Lucien's journal described a single figure stepping from the mist onto his deck, tall, cloaked, with no face. He tried to reach out, then felt cold fingers wrap around his wrist. The compass needle spun wildly, then snapped back to true north as Lucien collapsed. When he awoke, he were, as on shore, hours later, with no memory of the journey. His logbook simply noted, "They brought me back. They do not sleep." We gathered every known logbook from 1690 to 1720 in the regional archives, a stack of leather-bound ledgers tied with string. In dozens of entries, we found the same pattern. At high tide, a sudden lurch of the ship, a band of static on navigational instruments, a low singing that sounded like distant bells underwater. Then, blackout. Crew lists vanish for 1 to 5 days, and sailors reappear either on remote sandbanks or washed ashore on neighboring islands. No one reported seeing bodies, and no wreckage was ever found. When we plotted these reappearances on a map, they formed a rough semicircle around Mont Saint-Michel, as if those taken were ferried in a secret loop by unseen currents. To test that idea, we brought in oceanographers to model the tides and currents around the island. They crafted a scale pool with shifting sands and pumped water at twice the real speed. We placed small buoys at the harbour entrance, then simulated the high tide drag by increasing flow velocity at dusk. Sure enough, floating markers were pulled into hidden channels beneath submerged ridges, channels that deposit water and debris on the flats hours later. In real life, a small boat hull could vanish into those channels and re-emerge days later, grounded on a sandbar far from the original point. But markers don't sing, and they don't leave footprints. The model explained the travel, but not the haunting music. Next, we recorded field sounds on the flats at dawn. Our microphones picked up nothing at low tide, but as the water began to lap the banks again, a soft, rhythmic hum rose from the sand. Like many voices chanting in unison, we slowed the tape down and heard what sounded like whispered names over and over. Jean, Lucien, Antoine. It faded as the titter covered the sand. Locals who heard the playback said it matched the whispers their ancestors described. We also examined a rare first-person account from a sailor named Etienne Roux, who claimed he escaped by grabbing hold of a church buttress and praying until the tide receded. His grandson still shows the rusted iron sling he used to hoist himself up. Roux's journal tells of seeing 6 figures, tall women in black robes with faces hidden, wading through the shallows to stand before him on the steps of the abbey. They raised their hands as if blessing him, then melted back into the mist. He swore they spoke as one, voices soft but clear, return their souls, keep faith with the buried. After that night, Roux refused to sail again and lived out his days as a priest on the island. Is it possible these sisters of the sand are spirits bound to the flats, retrieving lost souls carried away by hungry tides? Or do they hide in the currents, a cult of fishermen's widows performing a ritual no living person can fully comprehend? Maritime historian Dr. Sophie Lambert argues that the legends likely sprang from real tragedies, dozens of small boats lost in quick currents, then drifting back weeks later. But she admits the chant recordings defy easy explanation. Sound can't travel underwater at those frequencies, she says. Yet there it is, recorded by modern equipment. Before we left the island, we staged one final test. At high tide, we anchored a small dinghy near the causeway with 2 volunteers holding microphones and a GPS tracker. They lowered the mics into the water, then drifted with the tide until they reached waist depth. For 40 minutes, nothing happened. Then, exactly at 3:13 a.m. by our watch, the dinghy lurched forward, as if gripped by a giant hand. On the recording, we caught a distant bell tone under the waves and a soft chorus of voices chanting, "Release us, release us." The volunteers froze, then rowed madly back to shore. Their GPS showed they drifted 2 kilometers northwest, exactly where the old logs said the missing sailors reappeared. Tonight, we leave you with these questions. Are these cloaked figures guardians, ferrying souls back to land? Or are they wardens reclaiming those who intruded on sacred sands? Does the chant call for mercy or issue a warning that the living should not trespass on the flats at high tide? When you hear the tide pull back and the moonlight glitters on the wet sand, will you be brave enough to listen for their voices? Or will you heed the mariners who survived only to warn us that some journeys must never begin? Beneath the abbey's great nave lies a secret long sealed by time and fear. Archaeologists discovered the cold stone door while scanning the floor with ground-penetrating radar. It showed a solid mass of masonry hiding a chamber carved into the rock. Local legend says this is the tomb of the 6 cloaked founders buried alive during the French Revolution to stop their midnight processions. Tonight, we join the team as they prepare to breach the door, quietly, respectfully, and face the question, should we disturb what has slept in darkness for over 200 years? Dr. Isabelle Fournier leads the excavation. She clears debris from a raised altar slab and uncovers a metal ring embedded in the stone door. This ring, she whispers, was meant to be pulled only once by the highest authority in the abbey. With gloves on her hands, she loops a rope through the ring, testing its strength. The room above stays silent, except for her measured breaths. We must treat this with reverence, she says. If we force it open carelessly, we risk angering whatever lies inside. Around her, students sketch the door's elaborate carvings, twisted vines, hooded figures, and symbols of the moon and tide. As they clear the final layer of dust, the team debates the risks. Local monk Father Laurent joins via video link. He reminds them of the 1793 decree that sealed the founders' fate. They were accused of summoning spirits beneath our feet, he says. When the revolutionaries stormed the abbey, they claimed the spirits rose from the earth and drove them back. Out of fear, the door was sealed. He pauses. If the founders' bodies rest here, trapped in ritual cloth, opening the door might let their power rise again. The archaeologists nod, weighing faith against history. Next, the ground-penetrating radar reveals a void just behind the door, roughly the size of a small chapel. No metal coffins show up, only a rectangular hollow. Dr. Fournier consults a spectral analysis printout. There are no signs of decay gases, she notes. That suggests the chamber was dry and ventilated at some point, or perhaps treated with herbal fumigants. She points to an area where the radar shows a faint grid pattern. This could be wooden beams or shelving. The students exchange glances. Was this a storage vault? Or a secret library of arcane texts, not a burial site at all? They decide to open the door at dawn, when the abbey's acoustics carry every sound clearly. As first light filters through stained glass, a hushed crowd gathers above on the stone floor. Dr. Fournier signals her assistant, who tightens the rope. The metal ring groans, shifting the heavy slab by millimeters. Beneath them, a rumble echoes like a distant bell. Dust drifts through the air as the door begins to turn on hidden pivots. The crowd holds its breath. With a final heave, the slab slides back, revealing a narrow passage illuminated by morning light. The archaeologists lower portable lights into the gap. Inside, they see rows of stone niches carved into the walls, each about the size of a coffin. Most are empty, but 6 hold bundles wrapped in dark cloth bound with rope. Around the edges, the floor is strewn with dried herbs. rosemary, lavender, and something darker that no one can identify. A stale, earthy smell rises like a cellar left undisturbed for centuries. Dr. Fournier leans in, carefully touching the nearest bundle. She hears a faint scrape, like cloth shifting against stone. The students step back. "Remember," she says gently, "we are here only to observe, not to judge." She pulls out a tiny sampling tool and lifts a scrap of fabric. It feels brittle. She places it in a sealed vial and hands it to her assistant. "Analysis later," she murmurs. "For now, we record everything." The team maps the chamber in detail, the niches, the bundles, the herbal residue, and a strange carving above each niche, a crescent moon cradling a hooded head. Father Laurent watches the live feed and weeps softly. "These were my sisters," he whispers. "They took vows to protect this place. They believed in a power older than the church itself." He crosses himself and bows his head. Controversy stirs among the onlookers. One historian argues the bundles are simple burial shrouds laid to rest with ritual herbs for preservation. Another claims they are talismans holding restless spirits at bay. As the debate heats up, Dr. Fournier makes a decision. They will close the chamber again at sunset, leaving the bundles undisturbed until lab tests can reveal their true nature. She orders the slabs slid back into place and resealed with a fresh layer of mortar, just enough to keep out moisture but easy to remove in the future. Before they finish, the archaeologists place a protective plaque above the slab. It reads, "Here rest the founders of St. Marisol. Disturb not this threshold, lest the tide of their secrets rise again." As they lower the patch into the recess, a sudden gust sweeps through the nave. Rustling robes and papers. The team feels a chill. Someone mutters, "They are waking." Father Laurent steps forward, placing his hand on the plaque. He prays silently, then turns to the archaeologists. "You have done well," he says. "Now you must leave. Let this chamber sleep until we understand what lies beneath." As the sun sets over the abbey, the stone door holds its secret once more. The researchers depart with their vials, photographs and recordings, but everyone who took part knows the real mystery remains behind that locked stone. Are these bundles human remains, or something far more dangerous? And if the founders truly lie entombed here, will the world be ready for what they carried in life and in death? Tonight, we leave you with the echo of that hidden chamber and the question it raises. Should we ever disturb the bedrock of ancient vows? Or is some knowledge meant to stay sealed beneath the tide-locked abbey floor, sleeping until the world forgets to look beneath its own feet? In the winter of 1943, during the height of World War II, Sister Marianne served at the crypt beneath Mont Saint-Michel's ancient abbey. It was said that beneath the vaulted stones lay the echoes of every soul that had vanished on the sands. On a frigid January evening, Sister Marianne descended alone into the silent corridors, carrying nothing but an old hand-cranked recorder and a single candle. She intended to capture the haunting hymn that local legend claimed could call the cloaked figures from the sands. The crypt was cold and damp. Every breath appeared as mist in the flickering candlelight. The recorder, a bulky device with a fragile wax cylinder, sat on a stone altar carved with moon and tide symbols. Sister Marianne set it to record, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I, Marianne of Saint Marisol, record this hymn in the hope that its power may finally be understood. If you hear this recording, know that I serve as witness. May God have mercy on my soul." She paused, took a steadying breath, and began to chant the ancient Latin verses passed down by the monastery's elders. The hymn spoke of tides and vestal vows, of silent watchers, and the price of broken oaths. Her voice rose and fell in a steady rhythm. "Unde custodes, silentias vocati, venite ad portas, in tenebris manati." As she chanted, the temperature in the crypt seemed to drop further. The candle's flame wavered, and in the distance a faint echo answered her call, a low, mournful hum, that sounded like distant voices joining her chant. Sister Marianne's eyes widened. She raised her candle, peering into the darkness where the shadows gathered near the far archway. She spoke again, her voice barely a whisper over the recorder's hiss. "They have come for me." At that moment, the candle guttered out. In the darkness, she let out a single terrified cry before the recorder's mechanism ground to a halt. The tape inside the machine cracked, its fragile wax cylinder warped by cold, before falling silent forever. In the days that followed, a fire swept through the abbey's upper chapel. Flames consumed wooden pews, melted stained glass, and reduced Sister Marianne's living quarters to ash. Among the destroyed artifacts was the hand-cranked recorder and its precious wax cylinder, lost to history, or so everyone thought. Decades later, in 1997, a local historian named Paul Lefebvre uncovered a sealed metal box behind a false panel in the monastery archives. Inside lay a single gramophone cylinder, charred at the edges but intact enough to spin. No other evidence of Sister Marianne's recording survived, no scripts, no instruments, just this fragile remnant of wax. Tonight we coax that cylinder to life. The archivists carefully clean its surface, place it on a restored antique gramophone, and drop the needle. Through static and crackle, the faintest strains of Sister Marianne's chant emerge. Unde, custodes, silentis. Her chanting repeats, warped by time, echoing against the crypt walls we can't see. Then, beneath the chanting, a whisper so soft it feels like a breath on the back of your neck. Help me. That single word is drowned out as the needle skips. The chant resumes, stronger, more urgent. Venit, ad portus. And then, clear and chilling, Sister Marianne's final utterance. They have come for me. Silence follows. The record winds down. The horn amplifies the last crackle. Then all falls still. What did Sister Marianne capture? Was it an echo of those cloaked figures answering her invocation? Or was it her own fear, imprinted onto wax by her tremulous voice? Experts have analyzed the cylinder's composition. Its wax matches materials used in the Abbey's workshop in 1943. The grooves show only one recording session, no hidden cuts, no tampering. Audio forensic teams slowed the playback and isolated the whisper beneath the chant. They confirmed it is not a byproduct of feedback or echo. It is a separate voice, layered intentionally. Convinced by the evidence, they concluded someone or something entered the crypt, spoke a single word, then vanished. But who spoke that word? Was it Sister Marianne herself, crying out in terror, or the cloaked watchers drawn by her hymn? Monks who later heard the playback wept openly. They believed the whisper to be the very spirits imprisoned below, perhaps Sister Marianne pleading from beyond, or the watchful ancestors answering their own call. Some skeptics argue mechanical artifacts, a loose shutter, a draft, or an animal scurrying across the recorder could create random whispers, but the tone of the voice, its precise timing beneath the chant's crescendo, defies chance, and the historical record confirms Sister Marianne's final words were exactly those. They have come for me. Tonight we leave you with the echo of that last chant. As you listen in the dark, ask yourself, is the curse bound to song? Does that ancient hymn still carry power, waiting to summon the cloaked figures once more? Will the next voice to record it become a witness or a victim? The gramophone's horn sits silent. The wax cylinder, delicate and mysterious, is locked away again beneath the abbey's stones. But the memory lingers, the chant, the whisper, the terror captured in wax, and in the hush that follows, you might hear it, softly, from the shadows. They have come for me. 81 cloaked figures, countless vanishings, zero closure. Mont Saint-Michel may guard a secret too dark for daylight. As the tide returns one last time, reflect on the patterns we've uncovered. These shadowed watchers slip between sea and stone, leaving questions where answers should stand. Now it's your turn. Share your theory in the comments. Will you dare face the next high tide and risk what waits beneath? Until we meet again, watch the sands, listen to the tides, because some echoes never fade. Beware the rising water, and good night. Stay curious, stay vigilant. Thank you for watching. Until next tide.